Welcome to Nutrition and Alternative Medicine. I'm JJ Flazanes, your host, and thank you for downloading today's episode. Today's show is brought to you by the Invisible Fitness Formula, 5 Secrets to Release Weight and End Body Shame, my last Amazon best-selling book. Get your free copy at jjflazanes.com/book. Again, that's jjflazanes.com/book. Also a reminder today, we're going to be talking about alternatives to the flu shot with Jeanne Peters, who is amazing. And I want to remind you that Jeanne is also going to be presenting in January at Releasing What Weighs You Down on healthy detoxing for fat loss and brain health. So if you love today's show and the information that she gives you, you'll have the opportunity to spend 3 full days with her learning about all kinds of nutrition from healthy detoxing for fat loss and brain health, as well as many other topics. That's just Jeanne. There's 3 others of us who are going to be presenting during Releasing What Weighs You Down. We do have a limited room, so I'd invite you to check it out now. The 3-pay option is still available, but will be gone on the 10th of November. Go to releasingwhatweighsyoudown.com. Releasingwhatweighsyoudown.com. Enjoy today's show. Today's show, alternatives to the flu shot. We have back our very special Jeanne Peters, our favorite registered dietitian and woman as far as I'm concerned. Jeanne Peters is a registered dietitian and a healthy aging expert with a mission to help women and men feel more vital energy through the healing power of whole foods and lifestyle medicine. In practice for over 33 years, she specializes in optimizing women's hormone health, digestive thyroid disorders, and how to break through weight loss resistance. She co-founded the Nourishing Wellness Medical Center with partner Dr. Alan Peters, who specializes in bioidentical hormone health and homeopathy for men and women. She was voted California Dietitian of the Year by her colleagues with her nutritional expertise and was recently certified in Clinical Homeopathy for the education in Clinical Homeopathy. Welcome back, Jeanne.
Hey, I'm glad to be here, JJ. Thank you.
Yes, and you'll be back again and again and again.
Lots to talk about. Yeah.
You and I can't even get together for a couple hours without coming up with 10 more show ideas. So
good. This is all great.
Yes.
The world needs to have alternatives to health and well-being. So I'm delighted that I can contribute to your bigger mission, which is to help educate people about some of the natural ways that they can support their health and feel better.
Absolutely. And this is a hot topic this season, flu shots. I've been sort of the not really for flu shots since the beginning of time. Some of it comes from just intuition. And then I've heard you speak about and write on Facebook about alternatives to flu shots. And so that's what we're going to cover today. So if you are listening out there and you're someone who's had a flu shot or you like the flu shots, that's fine. But we're going to bring information to you today to consider what alternatives there are and why you might want to consider them. So Jeanne, take over and tell us why someone would want to consider an alternative to the flu shot.
Well, this year is a good year to go ahead and challenge what you may have heard. 2014, the Center for Disease Control for the first time went on record saying, oops, sorry, the flu vaccine that we created for this year doesn't work. But actually, we didn't need to have the CDC come out and discuss that because there's a group called the Cochrane Database Review, which is considered to be like a third-party reviewer that looks at a lot of the gold standards in terms of medical research. And what they do is they look at what's effective, what does the research actually show? And what they've come out and shown in several years is that the flu vaccine is really no more effective than other flu remedies that you might have used by your grandmother or your mother, and things that I hope that we can talk about today. So the flu vaccine hasn't proven to be as effective as the CDC has tried to impress upon us. And by the way, JJ, it's not just the flu shot. It's things like Tamiflu. Tamiflu was released in the market, I think, back in 1999, and it's a huge moneymaker. I think it makes, there's like 6 billion prescriptions that are written every year. It's a 5-day course. It typically costs about $130. It's also shown not to be nearly as effective as people would like to think. The company that manufactures it, Roche, was reluctant to go and give the data that they used to be able to make some of the claims that they did. And they were pressed by the Cochrane database reviewers. And when they finally submitted their data, what they found was that, in fact, a lot of their data was manipulated. And, more and more we're finding that a lot of the best journals that we tend to rely upon giving us good data is, in fact, manipulation of statistics. So more and more we're having to question everything and start looking at sort of the tried and true remedies that we know have worked for thousands of years.
Are there risks involved with taking the flu shot?
There's always risk because, when you're taking the flu shot, you're not just getting the so-called that particular viral strain, but you're also going ahead and looking at all the additives that they put into the flu shot. I mean, just for example, formaldehyde is used as something to preserve it, but then there's also mercury is used in it. And I mean, we're not talking about, a small little dose. I mean, if you take a look at the typical mercury that you get, in a can of tuna, you get about 250 parts per billion. If you find in a flu shot, flu shots sometimes can have 51,000 parts per billion. So you're getting a form of mercury that's toxic to humans. So, I mean, there's other things we could talk about, but those two things right there are enough for many of us to go ahead and question, whether or not any amount of mercury is something that we should be in putting into our systems.
Just for those who haven't heard you or I talk about toxicity before, can you explain to those what mercury does to your body and why we don't want mercury? We know that we don't want to eat mercury in our fish, but why is it?
Well, it's a neurotoxic chemical and it has an affinity for fat. So for many of us, our brain is predominantly all fat. So there's certainly the concern about it getting lodged into tissue, fat tissue, in which it just stays there. It's not like it moves. Once it's in there, the body kind of vaults it away. So all these flu shots are highly toxic when injected into the body. You don't know exactly where that mercury is going to end up, but it damages brain functions. So anybody who thinks that vaccines are safe and effective, it's just not the case. So I think it's important to go ahead and share the story and spread the truth, JJ.
And the flu shot started, and the reason was to increase immunity so people didn't get sick, correct?
That's what we'd like to think, that it was to help support the body by introducing a small amount of a certain viral strain that your body would mount its own immunity to be able to manage when, let's say, that strain would be reintroduced into the system. But the truth of it is there's so many more effective ways to go ahead and mount immunity to help support your immunity without having to also at the same time be introducing some toxins along with that vaccine. So it's not like that vaccine is just something that's pure. There's chemicals in there that are used to help preserve it. So that's my concern. We're already being so exposed to so many toxic chemicals. Why go ahead and introduce another one when there's so many effective ways that we can help to build immunity without needing the flu shot?
Absolutely. It is a story that I didn't share with you when I saw you recently, but I think I want to go into just a few things that people do that actually weaken their immune system. So if you can think of that while I'm telling this little story.
Sure. Yeah.
That's going to be the next thing I want to cover is just, what do you do in your life? What do you consume that is going to suppress and weaken your immune system? And obviously food is going to be a huge one. When we were away for a holiday recently, my husband and I traveled to a couple different places, and we were in the same room, in the same beds, in the same apartments, in the same area, in the same houses. We were together all the time. Mm-hmm. And when we got back from the trip, he got sick and I did not. And the only difference was what we ate. And there was a lot of processed foods, a lot of sugar, and a lot of starches and wheats and grains, but really all processed with preservatives and additives and everything, nothing fresh. And I noticed that he was feeling sick. And one of the people who we had seen had said something about sugar suppressing immunity and weakening the immune system. And I thought that was really interesting because then here I am, I'm fine. And the only difference was that I had a much cleaner diet than he had over the trip. So
Really
let's
good
speak
point.
to that.
Really good point. Because, one of the ways that you can unbalance your gut flora is to just fertilize it with sugar. Sugar is just like fertilizer for pathogenic bacteria and yeast and fungi and all the things that live in your immune system. In fact, 90% of your immunity lives in your gut, JJ. So whatever you introduce into your mouth that actually ends up down in your gut is going to have a huge impact. So most people don't realize that decreasing sugar is crucial for optimizing your immune system, and grains break down to sugar. So it's not just sugar, found in cookies and cakes, but it's all the other processed ingredients that go along with that break down to sugar. So that's a big deal. But, even you were just saying, some of the things that we should look at that actually weaken the immune system. Sugar would be definitely number one. But even just some of the over-the-counter pain relief medications that people use when they feel like, they're like a cold is coming on or virus, they take Tylenol or something. And it's actually been shown that Tylenol will actually suppress your body's ability to produce the antibodies that can help to destroy the cold virus. But how many times have you heard of people running to their physicians to get an antibiotic to help them with cold symptoms? I mean, most of the time when people get a cold, it's not a bacterial infection, it's a virus. And so when you take an antibiotic, it's really almost useless against colds and flu. And, Dr. Peters gets a lot of his patients will call in, can you go ahead and write me a prescription for a Z-Pak? And he's really had to educate people and say, look, it's way, overprescribed for this purpose. So when you have a cold or flu, we get right back to some of the things that we know we can do that aren't going to put you in a position where you're weakening your gut, because when you take an antibiotic, you're weakening all the good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria, if in fact that was the issue. But most of the time it's not. It's a viral infection.
I love that. Thank you for bringing that to the table in terms of pain relief and medication, because people would not make that connection and think that.
Yeah.
I think antibiotics, more and more people are realizing and understanding how we're killing off the good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria and how we need the good bacteria, but that 90% of our immunity is in our gut. Of course, something that's going to kill off your bacteria, plus then that pain medication. That's so interesting. So are there any other, just the top, caffeine, I'm sure is one of them?
Well, you know what? Something that we forget about that is a positive thing that you can do is sleep. Sleep actually helps to rebuild the immune system. The immune system doesn't work, 24/7. It goes in phases. So when you have a temperature, a temperature is when your immunity is mounting a response to a viral infection. And that increased heat is actually something that's positive. And then it'll go down and you'll have, a period where that, you're not constantly at an elevated temperature. Most people will have their temperature rise and fluctuate. So you want to look at the fact that sleep is an issue, but when you're not getting deep sleep, and I can just think about when I had my kids and they were all in college and they were studying for finals and that, typically my oldest son and my youngest son both would always come down with the flu almost like the day after finals were completed, because they were living on 2 and 3 and 4 hours of sleep. So, a lack of sleep certainly is when people are most likely to get, common cold and flu virus infections.
Excellent. And I bet you we could also put stress underneath there as well.
Oh yeah. stress of the finals. That's mounting. So, how many times have we heard that, in Western medicine, getting sick is our way of calming down, getting the relaxation that we actually need. So, can you remember times when you got sick, after college finals?
Well, it's been a while.
Yeah.
No, I don't remember getting sick after college finals, but I remember having adrenal fatigue after my wedding.
Yeah.
And I remember having adrenal fatigue after starting my business.
Sure.
And I remember, and living on anxiety and survival stress for a long time. So absolutely. Yeah. All right, this is a great list. So just to recap for everyone listening, that 90% of the immunity is in your gut.
Yes.
And the 4 or 5 biggest detriments to your immunity would be sugar, pain relief medication, including antibiotics, and a lack of sleep and stress. Okay,
Good.
good. All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to start to go over some of the top ways to build your immunity in order to naturally strengthen yourself to be able to resist and fight off the flu. Let's start with, what do you think is the top one?
It's a good question. Let's go ahead and look at nutrients. We'll look at things like vitamin D and zinc, even vitamin C. Those are three popular ones. So let's actually get out the facts and on how you prescribe and what you need and how they work.
Sounds good.
Why don't we'll start with vitamin D, because I think that's probably one that we measure every single person who comes into our office. We measure their vitamin D levels, JJ, and it's just shocking to see how many people are living life with extremely low blood levels of vitamin D. So your serum level has a lot to do with your immunity. So vitamin D is one of the most important nutrients. It's a fat-soluble vitamin that we now know it functions and actually produces about 200 to 300 different antimicrobial peptides in your body that are responsible for killing bacteria, viruses, fungi. So when you optimize your levels of vitamin D, you're helping to get those invaders out of your body. You're helping to go ahead and stimulate the immunity that's responsible for keeping those antimicrobial agents in check. And most people that we measure, they have low vitamin D, and it takes a while to rebuild and to get those serum levels up. So it's not so much how much vitamin D you take, it's really looking at what's your serum level. And ideally, we'd love to see people somewhere around 50, maybe up to 75 nanograms year round. Although sun exposure is the best way to help raise your vitamin D, it's really hard for a lot of people to get out into the sun to be able to get those levels up to like 50 to 75. So most people need to be supplementing with vitamin D.
I agree. Now, I have a question about, I know that vitamin D has been more thoroughly researched and in the media for probably good, 5 to 7 years now?
10 years.
So before this, was it just sort of undiagnosed? Because I would have to say that I don't know anybody who's not taking vitamin D who has a high vitamin D level in their blood naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. If vitamin D was not looked at, it was looked at as a vitamin. So we thought of it as a fat-soluble vitamin that was important for like bone health. But it's really been in the last 10 to maybe 15 years that we are starting to see the connection between vitamin D being actually operating like a pro-hormone. So it's more than just a vitamin. It has so many, it's really responsible for helping to decrease the risk of all different types of cancers, chronic respiratory disorders. It's amazing for not only bone health, it's out helping with blood sugar health. There's so many, it's almost like, what doesn't vitamin D do? It's got so many benefits, but most of us are low. And so if you aren't sure, you ought to get your physician to measure your levels. And if your levels are under 30, because the range for vitamin D is somewhere between 30 to 100 would be the acceptable range. But we just are seeing now that you don't want to be, it's like saying, it's okay to go ahead and get a D because a D is passing. You don't want to be a D student. You want to be an A student. So A students are going to go ahead and have better options. So get your vitamin D up to 75 or higher, and you're going to see a huge improvement in your overall immunity. And by the way, if you're a parent listening to this, make sure that you get your pediatrician to measure your child's vitamin D. We're seeing that it's not just adults, it's children as well. So we want to get serum levels up in both adults and children so that everybody benefits from improving their immunity.
Excellent. Yes, I take vitamin D and it's in the house and I always get it from you. And I would recommend that everyone also definitely, from personal experience, definitely follow through with the vitamin D. It's really important. When clients ask me about vitamins, I say that it's one of the top two. What I recommend would be
good
omegas and vitamin D.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else that you take omegas and vitamin D.
JJ, that's great. I'm so glad to hear you say that. And one thing I want to just add to anybody that's listening out there is when you start to feel the symptoms of a cold or a flu coming on, and you maybe have been a bit negligent, that's the time that you take it. So instead of running to go get vitamin C, get your vitamin D out, because it's been proven that vitamin D, again, like I said, it's responsible for immediately starting to activate all these antimicrobial peptides. They're like proteins that up-level the body's immunity to go after that bacteria, viruses, fungi, depending on what it is. So take your 5,000 units, or get up to 10,000 units. In fact, sometimes when my son is sick, I know he's somebody that things come on really quickly. I might even have him take as much as 15,000 units. And there's no downside to that. A lifeguard that's sitting outdoors in Southern California for 8 hours is getting about 20,000 units of vitamin D in a day. So there's no fear that you have that somehow by taking, 15,000, that you're going to put your body at some kind of risk. You're actually going to help it support it greatly.
We probably could have done a whole show just on vitamin D.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. So we need to move on because we need to take a break and thank the sponsors. But before we do that, and we're going to finish up with some of the other high recommendations. So I think, if anything, everyone listening will get, number one, vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D, vitamin D. And also what we've talked about in terms of getting rid of sugar, reducing sugar, stop your pain medication, getting some more sleep,
Good.
Watching what goes in your mouth, in your gut, and taking some probiotics, especially if you've taken any antibiotics. But I know that you have a whole bunch of remedies that people probably have in their kitchen, things that they can do to help with immunity and the flu, and they might have it right now in their kitchen. They could leave listening to this and walk right in there and take care of it. And I know there's other homeopathic, what are good alternatives for flu shots?
I think it's really good to know that anything that you can do that's going to support heat in the body is going to be good. And so a couple things that you might have that are wonderful, and your grandmother or maybe your mother made this for you. I know I certainly made it for my kids. And that is just making a tea from a combination of some of the herbs that are classic, like sage and thyme and oregano and ginger. Sage, thyme, and oregano are wonderful because they have a lot of natural ingredients that are antimicrobial, antifungal, antibacterial. So they're going to help support not only your body's immune system, but they're going to go and kill off some of those invaders. So just making a combination where you might put 4 or 5 fresh blossoms of sage or oregano and maybe like a tablespoon of honey. Honey is very soothing. It's also something that causes a lot of water to be brought into the tissues. So it actually supports like a really scratchy, dry, maybe a rough throat. So just incorporating some hot tea, or making a chicken broth with lots of garlic. Garlic is antimicrobial, it's antifungal, it's got wonderful properties. Sometimes people just don't want to have a lot of food, so just having a good old-fashioned chicken bone broth or a beef bone broth with extra herbs in it can be wonderfully soothing, and the warmth often makes people feel better. So that would be good. A tea combination would be terrific. Something else that you might have running in your kitchen, if you keep zinc around, zinc being it's a mineral, but one of those minerals that's extremely important for wound healing, but also for activating the immune system. And again, the Cochrane Database Review, which is this group that's like a third party that looks at medical research, found that if you can take zinc, like 30 milligrams of zinc sulfate within a day in which you first feel symptoms, you can cut down the time that you have a cold by 24 hours. So you can really reduce not only the severity, but how long that cold might take. So there's been lots of reviews, looking at trials in which people use zinc to help reduce the severity of symptoms. And most of us, may just have zinc hanging around. So 30 milligrams. It's going to be cheap if you don't. You can get it, at most of your health food stores or pharmacies, for maybe $6 or $7. So zinc sulfate would be another thing to consider adding into your flu kit or your immune boosting kit. And another one is oregano oil. A lot of people keep oregano around, but the oil of oregano is hundreds of times stronger. And some of the ingredients that are found, particularly something called carvacrol, but it's got great benefits. And it's the most active antimicrobial agent in oregano oil. So a couple of drops of that in the tea, or you could put it into those little gel caps and just have your kids swallow that if they just, are going to have an adverse effect from the taste of oregano oil because it is strong. So those would be two things that you could do as well.
And then let's mention our favorite homeopathic remedy.
Yeah, my favorite. It's kind of hard to say it, so it's oscillooxanum. It's a hard name, but it's really tough on your flu. So it's a homeopathic preparation. It's been around for like 65 years. It's frequently claimed to be, the number one flu remedy in Europe because the research studies that are out there shows that not only does it help to reduce flu-like symptoms by about 7 hours, but it also reduces the length that people have it the earlier you take it. So most people, when they start feeling the symptoms of flu, could be like cold or they might feel achy. That's when you want to take Oscillo. It's amazing. And the best way to take it, it's like little tiny pellets that you put under your tongue and you let them dissolve at the first moment that you feel those symptoms. And if you are able to get a little bit of sleep in, many people will find that within a day, they feel better. The flu is basically over. It's not just for the flu, though. It's for people who feel a little bit run down. So this homeopathic preparation that's FDA approved, that's non-toxic, safe to take for women who are pregnant or nursing, you can take it and the moment you start feeling run down, so you don't get to the point where you're having some of the classic flu symptoms, is the way to go ahead and treat Oscillo. So I always encourage all of my patients, my parents that we work with, to keep that in their travel bag, to keep some in your purse and to keep some, on your medicine cabinets, because the earlier you take it, the less likely you are to have that flu continue to linger.
Okay, so to recap, we had what you want to take to increase your immunity would be vitamin D, right? Get some sleep and deal with what we talked about taking out of your life that doesn't challenge your immunity. Mm-hmm. And then if you're starting to feel like you're coming down with the flu, you've got the Oscillo as something that you take immediately upon feeling any symptom. Mm-hmm. Now, Jeannie, what I've realized and had experience with both myself and then giving it to my husband is when we're past that, you feel more than this onset of the symptoms starting. Right. We're now into full-blown
fever,
having
chills,
symptoms.
fatigue.
Right. I found cold calm, would that be the right thing to recommend?
Sure.
That's what's worked for us,
mm-hmm.
is to, once you're past that, catching it right before it happens and you're in it, that rather than using Oscillo, you could use the homeopathic remedy called cold calm to deal with the symptoms and get through that faster?
Yeah, cold calm is great, particularly for, when you really do have the classic cold. So you've got, a stuffy nose, or maybe you're getting, your nose is so stuffed up that it's not running. So it's got about 5, maybe 6 different homeopathic remedies dealing with some of the classic symptoms related more to a cold. So it's not so much for the flu, it's dealing with if your symptoms have now gone into a full-blown cold. Yes, cold calm is fantastic. People who get the flu, their symptoms that they get, they may not get the runny nose so much, but they're getting the joint pain, because as the flu or the viruses are actually putting out their toxins, it builds up, in the joints. And so it's that muscle achiness that Oscillo is great for.
And then, of course, let's not forget that all dis-ease and ailments, in my opinion, come from an emotional root as well. And influenza, the probable cause on the mental emotional level, says response to mass negativity and beliefs. Fear, belief in statistics. So in terms of the flu, and I know colds have to do with, let me just quickly go to colds and read cold, because I know that has to do with being overwhelmed, because I did get sick after I launched this podcast. Okay, colds. Too much going on at once. Mental confusion, disorder, small hurts. I get 3 colds every winter type of belief. So I did get a little bit of a cold right after we launched the podcast, because I expected that my immunity would be a little run down from stress. I didn't have a lack of sleep. I just had a little bit more stress than normal. So when all else fails, and when you're doing everything right, if you will, in terms of your food and your supplementation and getting enough rest and being well hydrated and being well fed and getting rid of all of the other excess things that challenge your immunity in your diet, take a look at some of that mental emotional stuff too, because that really does trigger a lot of these symptoms and dis-ease, if you will, that we do experience. So it's as important as anything else.
Great. Good advice, JJ.
Now, Jeannie, you've been on the show multiple times and you'll be back multiple times in the future, but give everybody a little bit of a background about what you do and how they can connect with you and how you can help them, especially in this situation.
Sure. Again, we run the Nourishing Wellness Medical Center. I work in tandem with my husband, Dr. Alan Peters, and we have a website, www.nourishingwellness.com. People can go there if they have a question that they would like to have me address in the future. It could be, they could just send me an email, jp@nourishingwellness.com. We specialize in looking at food as medicine. So we specialize in giving people prescriptions for food rather than prescriptions for medicine. So if that speaks to you and the kind of philosophy that you want to go ahead and take on more in your life, feel free to go ahead and connect with us through the Nourishing Wellness Medical Center. Thank you, JJ.
And as a reminder, to download your free copy of The Invisible Fitness Formula, 5 Secrets to Release Weight and End Body Shame, go to jjflizanes.com/book.